Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm glad you could join in, and I see a few people with their cameras on, and I'll say part of my role, before I introduce myself, part of my role at the AAMC is working on wellness as well as medical school admissions. And after spending the last, 15, 16 months in a pandemic and 10 to 12 hours a day on Zoom calls, I am completely okay if you'd like to take this moment of wellness and not turn your cameras on. But feel free to chat and interact in the chat box with your colleagues and post your questions there so that we can have an interactive session this afternoon. If you are comfortable turning on your camera, feel free to do so, but please do not feel obligated to be on camera. We can all take this moment of respite. So can we agree to that? Cool. So go ahead. Was someone going to talk? Okay, cool. So my name is Nishika Knight, and I come from the Association of American Medical Colleges, and we are a nonprofit organization that represents the allopathic or MD granting medical schools in the United States and Canada. At the AAMC, we're passionate about supporting medical education, and that's part of what I'll be talking about with you today. I want to talk to you about the medical school application process, the tools and resources that can help you prepare yourself to be a medical school candidate, and more specifically, some ways that you can help your background and experiences resonate with the medical school application process and speak to admissions officers about who you are and why you're pursuing a career in medicine. So if you give me a moment, I'm going to start my presentation now so we can get started. Okay, so I wanted to share this brief video with you of Dr. Mike Bergoli. Mike was a profilee on a resource that we call the Anatomy of an Applicant, and that's the resource that I'll be sharing from today. I actually just got off of a presentation with Dr. Bergoli for our virtual medical school fair. We have a series of med school fairs that we do, and the second fair was about non-traditional applicants and career changers, and Mike was one of the presenters on that fair. So I wanted you to hear this brief clip from Mike.
After a couple of years of encouraging high school students to pursue medicine, my uncle died of a heart attack. EMS in my community was so inundated with calls due to the physician shortage that the response to his house was delayed. And when it comes to the heart, time is muscle. I realized then that it was my passion to pursue medicine that motivated my career in EMS. Prior to this realization, I didn't think that I could become a physician. I didn't know any Native Hawaiian doctors. And I thought that people with a history of being in foster care and homeless didn't do well in higher education.
So there's so many people who have stories similar to Mike's stories, people who have a passion and a desire to pursue a career in medicine, but who are unclear about the steps to take. And sometimes the medical school application process can seem insurmountable. Perhaps you think about things like how you will afford the application process and how you'll pay for your education. Perhaps you think about how you'll secure the prerequisite coursework, how you'll obtain mentors and advisors, folks who can help steer you through the process, how you'll access pre-health advising, how you'll access clinical shadowing opportunities. It can seem insurmountable, and sometimes students feel like they need to check off every box on this imaginary checklist of what it means to be a good pre-med applicant. So we created this resource, Anatomy of an Applicant, to share with potential or prospective medical school applicants the many ways that their diverse backgrounds and experiences can map to what have been identified as 15 core competencies for entering medical students. So I'll be sharing with you excerpts from that resource today. So there are on this resource profiles of current medical students and past medical students who are now practicing physicians, and just snippets from their backgrounds. So the first one is Rose. So you'll see here that Rose was introduced to medicine at the age of 8 through her own experiences with the healthcare system. She was orphaned in early childhood. One of her volunteer experiences was tutoring high school students and participating in health fairs at her church. She actually was born in Haiti and moved to the United States and worked as a nurse, and then later decided to become a physician. The next profilee I wanted to share with you today is Patrick. So Patrick was born in Los Angeles to an immigrant family. His family didn't have regular access to medical care, and he too had an encounter with the healthcare system at an early age, which really stimulated his fascination with medicine. He completed an undergraduate degree and applied to medical school, and actually wasn't successful the first time around. And I think it's important for us to highlight that not everybody's road to medicine looks the same. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that later. After undergrad, Patrick secured some volunteer experiences and worked in as a renal physiology assistant. He mentored high school students. He took some additional coursework, completed a master's program, and thereupon, when he reapplied to medical school, was accepted. Deirdre actually was a career changer. Deirdre had a family when she applied to medical school. She also had an outstanding career as a management consultant before deciding that she wanted to pursue a career in medicine. One of the things I wanted to highlight about Deirdre, in addition to having a family and being a parent, was that Deirdre was not a science major in undergrad. She actually studied history and majored in and minored in math. So she had a different academic preparation. She also highlighted that she had an average Mcat score. And so that because of that, she didn't attempt to change her academic preparation. She actually sought medical schools who would appreciate the diversity of background and experiences that she had. And then finally, Daryl. Daryl on the right here worked as a firefighter and EMT in college, and his experiences as a firefighter and an EMT and dealing with medical emergencies inspired his desire to pursue a career in medicine. So those are 4 profilees that I wanted to share with you on this resource. So the Anatomy of an Applicant resource is a resource that, again, defines the medical school competencies for you. So these are pre-professional competencies that medical school admissions officers have identified as beneficial for every entering medical student. They're not a checklist of sort, and applicants have a variety of expertise and proficiency in each of these competencies. What we're going to do today will help you to identify where you fall within the range of proficiency on each of these competencies, and then talk a little bit more about how these competencies fit within the breadth and scope of medical school application requirements. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so I can drop the link in the chat to where this workbook is located on our website, so you can download it and follow along with me during the presentation. So there's no cost to access the resource. You should be able to download it and save it in PDF form on your computer. I don't think it's a fillable file at the moment because we just changed our website around. So unfortunately, some things didn't transfer the way we'd like. So you can, if you have the full version of Adobe Acrobat, you can fill it in as a fillable file. If not, you can just print it off or just save it and follow along in your journals or in your own notebooks. Okay, so back to the presentation. So these are the core competencies that have been identified by medical schools as valuable for applicants to have. Each of these core competencies really explains some aspect of who you are as a person, what you've done in your background, and how you've gained experiences either through coursework, through volunteer work, or through real life situations. One of the things that we've included in those profilees of current and past medical students is the different ways that each person met the core competencies through their everyday life experiences, whether that was caring for an ill family member, volunteering in their community, taking coursework, participating in a research lab. We wanted to show that there are a diversity of ways of meeting the competencies. So what I just shared the link with you for is the self-assessment guide for the Anatomy of an Applicant project. And this self-assessment guide includes components of the medical school application, an explanation of what each component of the medical school application tells admissions officers about you. For example, letters of recommendation tell admissions officers about your personal qualities, such as your character traits and emotional maturity, like empathy, attention to detail, and dependability. Then the next section of the self-assessment guide walks you step by step through understanding what each competency means, measuring your level of preparedness in that area, and developing a plan for building proficiency in each area. So today we will practice using this self-assessment guide. So the first part of the self-assessment guide I wanted you to take a look at is the pre-professional competency on service orientation. So service orientation, as medical schools define it, is a desire to help others and sensitivity to others' needs and feelings, demonstrating a desire to alleviate others' distress, recognizing and acting on your responsibilities to society, locally, nationally, and globally. Now, what I'll do here is pause for a few moments to give you time to reflect on the questions that this self-assessment worksheet is asking you about your relationship to service orientation. And then after you take a few moments to identify where you fall on this guide, then we'll give you an opportunity to share, if anyone wants to, about where they think they are on the competency level. So take a few moments to look at this slide and reflect on your own relationship to service orientation. Would anyone like to share in the chat how you feel you've demonstrated this competency, or to come off mute? Feel free to unmute and share with your colleagues how you feel you've demonstrated competency in service orientation. Any thoughts, or are you still figuring it out? Cool. Yes, volunteering with the local Medical Reserve Corps. Absolutely. Other examples? Share a little bit about what you do with the Medical Reserve Corps and why you think it's important. You promote public health and help with vaccine distribution. Sounds great. Anyone else? Other examples of how you fulfilled service orientation? Great. I feel like I demonstrate this with my volunteer work and participation in the Red Cross. Absolutely. I see this comment here about planning, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because one of the benefits of this worksheet is that you have the opportunity to talk about your plans, not just those things you've already accomplished, because what we hope you'll do is develop your competency level. So you're not just reflecting on what you've already done, you're thinking about a plan for how to get there. So I'm going to move on with that to the next slide. The next slide is the second half of each of those competency worksheets. It's your plan to develop in the competency area wherever you see a need for improvement. So one of the questions we have then is, if you feel like you don't have sufficient proficiency in the area of service orientation, then what steps can you take in order to develop in that area? And what's your timeline? And in the notes section, you can talk about who you need to contact, potential areas where you can get some service or volunteer experience. And then one of the things I hope we'll think about, especially in this virtual era in the time of COVID, is ways that you can get online service opportunities or online volunteer opportunities, or even virtual experiences. So if anyone has any thoughts to share with your colleagues in the chat about how they can get virtual opportunities, feel free to share those as well. Then I'm going to give you a few moments to reflect on your next steps, timeline, and notes about how you can obtain experience in the future to build on your proficiency in service orientation. And yes, being there for your friends whenever they need a shoulder to cry on is definitely a way of showing empathy and service. And so there's a way that you can articulate that in your medical school applications. And while you're reflecting and writing, I'd like to respond to Hun Young's point here too, about not being old enough for most of the shadowing and volunteering opportunities. Don't limit yourself to a specific context of shadowing and volunteering. It can be in your neighborhood with your next door neighbor. So there are plenty of opportunities and contexts to gain experience without it being in a specific clinical environment or a structured environment. Other places where I'm thinking about getting volunteer opportunities are in places like your local faith communities, or if you live in a county or an incorporated city or community, is you can reach out to your local park and planning commission. They usually have volunteer opportunities. Think about your local public libraries. They always have volunteer opportunities. Think about nursing homes. Your hospitals tend to have more of the age restrictions just because of clinical and insurance requirements, but your Red Cross may have some volunteer opportunities. So think about low-hanging fruit, things like neighborhoods and families and communities that you know of. And all of those experiences are valid experiences in the medical school application process. I'm not going to walk too in detail today on what the application asks for in terms of the centralized applications for the MD programs, but one of the areas where you place your experiences asks you about why an experience is meaningful. So even if it's just volunteering with your family to help babysit or to help care for your ill or aging grandparent, you have the opportunity to demonstrate in your application why you think that experience was meaningful. I remember when my grandmother was ill, one of the opportunities we had was caring for her so that, sharing the responsibility so that no one family member could become overwhelmed. But what that taught me about was caregiving and what it takes to be a caregiver. It gave me the opportunity to interact with doctors and physicians when she was hospitalized or when she had to go in for appointments, and I accompanied her. When we had to pick up her medication, I got to see how expensive some prescriptions were and to think about what it would mean for a person who didn't have sufficient insurance or healthcare coverage to cover the cost of those prescriptions and what kinds of choices they might need to make. So those are the kinds of things you would reflect on in your application. And those don't require any type of structured volunteer or shadowing environment. So I'm going to move on to the next one. The next competency I'd like for us to take a look at today is capacity for improvement. And this one's a little more tricky, and that's the reason why I wanted to talk about this one. The definition here is that you set goals for continuous improvement and for learning new concepts and skills, that you engage in reflective practice for improvement, and that you solicit and respond appropriately to feedback. And I'll give you one example. I remember when we were hiring for an administrative role in our office. And one of the interview questions I always like to ask people was, what do you want to learn this year? It could be related to your job. It could be related to life in general. You could tell me you want to learn snowboarding. Why that was important to me is that it told me that you were a lifelong learner and that you were open to new ideas and concepts, so that if we introduced new skills in the workplace, you would be open to adjusting to those kinds of new bits of information. So this here is asking you, what is your capacity for learning new information? Do you freak out when you get introduced to a new skill? If there's some new concept introduced in your class, do you fall apart? How do you handle new information and the need for new information? How do you take feedback? How do you process feedback? Do you respond to feedback? Do you have examples? And this is a good place for reflecting on things like, do you have examples of failing in classes or failing exams? How do you respond to failure? What do you do with failure? Do you use failure as a stepping stone for improvement? So I'm going to stop talking for a moment to give you a chance to reflect on these questions in relationship to your capacity for improvement. Would anyone like to share in the chat how they demonstrated capacity for improvement? That one may take a little bit of courage to share.
Hi, I'm Mia. I'm from California, and I think that I'm demonstrating capacity for improvement because I recently became a state officer, so that was like a big step and something that I hadn't done before. So going through the process and the application, the interviews, and then also just like a new leadership role was like a big change.
Thank you, Mia. So Mia, my question to you then is, why do you think it's important that you sought the opportunity to become an officer?
I think that it was in like the process itself was important because it encourages you to look at yourself and who you are as a leader, and like all the questions that they ask you in the interviews, like it's very personal. So you have to look at yourself like through kind of like a close lens. And then also just being a state officer, you get to work with people who have different strengths than you, different perspectives. So it broadens your strengths and your perspectives too.
Thank you for sharing that. And just so you know, that transferable skill is the same process you would bring to the medical school application. So that same type of self-awareness and internal scrutiny you would do, thinking about how you present yourself, how you brand yourself, how you engage with people who have different views and thoughts and experiences, is the same process you would go through as a medical school applicant. So thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else want to share an experience they had with, oh, great. When I did, oh wait, now they're coming in and it's moving fast. Okay, when I did speech and debate, anytime I would get critiques, I would write them down in a notebook so I can use them to improve. That is fantastic. Trey, I see you have your hand raised. What did you want to share?
Hi, my name is Trey, and my way that I show my capacity for improvement is that, straight enough, I am a game master for Dungeons and Dragons, which is a storytelling game. Everyone knows that. The famous tabletop role-playing game. And even if I've been GMing for about 2 years now, I still yearn to improve and better my craft at telling a story. I like to find my little mistakes and just better myself as a person and as a game master. So that's how I show mine.
That's cool. I
playing
see.
Games.
Yeah, that's wait. And I saw some heads nodding when you said that. So I think there's some folks who can resonate with you. I see another chat coming in. This year, I set the goal for myself to read a minimum of 30 books before New Year's to improve my reading comprehension and critical thinking skills. So far, I've read 14 books, currently reading the 15th one. Exactly. Yeah, I set a goal of 50 books and I've decided that's a little bit ambitious. So now I've had to kind of reevaluate that. Though graduate school helped me to get very, very close. So yeah, so what do you think it says about you that you have the capacity for improvement? Trey, would you like to reflect on that?
Okay, because I personally have a problem speaking, so I feel like DMing, trying to telling a story, it helps me really make my vocabulary and my speech pattern a lot better, because right now I'm not the best speaker, but DMing, I have to get into the mindset of telling a story, so I become like a different person almost when I'm in it, the zone.
Fantastic. So let's move on to the planning and development phase of this one. I'll give you a couple of moments. If you feel like you need to plan capacity for improvement, why don't you reflect on your next steps, your timeline, and any notes you might need about who to contact or where you want to reach out and start to develop your plan to build your capacity for improvement. So let's take a few moments and share what plans you all have to build your capacity for service orientation and for capacity for improvement. I think your colleagues can benefit from hearing your ideas. Sometimes it helps, I think, to be in a room with like-minded people to hear what their suggestions are, because it's how we get great ideas that we can implement in our own lives. So does anyone want to share what's your next steps for building either capacity for improvement or service orientation? And feel free to chat or unmute and share with us. Any thoughts? And if you're looking for ideas, feel free to say, hey, Nishika, we need some ideas. What do you suggest? Tenora, is that your name? Do you have any thoughts?
Yes. So for capacity of improvement, my next steps would probably be to take the feedback that I'm given and process it and make sure that my thinking process is what is sorry. So maybe when I get the feedback that I'm given, I will take it and apply it into whatever that project or something that I'm working on.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. And honestly, you know, you'll be surprised how feedback crosses over to multiple projects or contexts or classes or experiences. So you may get some feedback in one area and not be able to use it in that particular area, but it relate to something completely different later on. So thanks for sharing. You know, one of the other things I like to do, I'll tell you for improvement, is whenever I go into a new class and I get a new professor, the first thing I ask is, what 2 to 3 books would you recommend to me to read on this topic? If you could suggest anything on this particular area that you think I need to be aware of, where would you point me? Or I was in a class one time and a teacher asked a question about a topic, and I guess she assumed that everybody knew the information, and I had no idea what she was talking about, and I had never heard the terms before. So I raised my hand and said, now, where would I have learned about that, and where would you point me so I can learn more about it? I like to be as up to speed on this particular topic as you are. And it was funny, I got a lot of messages from people later on saying, thank you for asking that question, because I didn't know what she was talking about either. And sometimes I think it takes courage to be honest and say, I really don't know, but where can I go to get the information? And I think that reflects a certain level of maturity. You got to be willing to say, yeah, I don't know, but be a lifelong learner and have the courage to learn and grow. I see Lydia has her hand raised. So what would you like to share?
Hi, I'm Lydia. I'm from Colorado, and I was thinking that by encouraging criticism and having an open mind, as well as also encouraging that you don't know everything, you can take that criticism you get back and then improve on stuff that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny. I think it takes courage to admit that you don't know everything, because so often, and especially so I'm not one of those older people who thinks the internet and online are just completely evil, but I do realize that sometimes people present a different face that's not completely authentic. And so you get this picture that people are perfect and that they don't have flaws. And so it takes a little bit more courage to say, hey, I'm not all the way there and I still have area for improvement. But one of the things that I've learned and am learning is that authenticity is valued more often than being a cookie cutter. And especially when it comes to medical school application, and we don't talk about this too much in the presentation, but there's a concept called holistic review that's really popular in medical school admissions and is really branching into other areas of higher education. And holistic review is the process that says every person is a whole person and a well-rounded person, and that you have your own unique mix of experiences, attributes, and metrics that you bring to the table. No two people are alike. And as you know, as aspiring physicians and those in the healthcare practicing area, you know that even twins are not alike, right? So there are differences even in people who share the same genetic makeup. So there are no two people alike and there are no two applicants alike. And so what we encourage in holistic admissions is that you bring your full self, everything that makes you unique to the table, and don't try to be like someone else. So have the courage to be your authentic self. Let's move on from here, because I want to leave us some time for questions about the application process. So the next thing I wanted to share is just a few snippets from Anatomy of an Applicant profile leads who we interviewed on our website. And we asked them, what's one thing you wish you knew about applying to medical school? And Rose said, choose schools with missions that align with your own, because her school is focused on rural and underserved communities. And that really resonated with her because that's the type of community that she also came from. Patrick said, don't give up. So talking about capacity for improvement, you may not get in the first time, and that's okay. And just to demystify something for you all, did you know that every year about 1/3 of the national medical school application pool is re-applicants? So there are people who did not get into medical school the first time around. The reason why that's important is because you're not the only one if you don't get in on the first round. You have to be able to reevaluate your application, see what you're bringing to the table, and then also make sure that you're applying to a school that's a good match for your experiences and background. You're finding a school, you're applying to a school that resonates with who you are and values what you bring to the table. Deirdre said you don't have to be a perfect applicant. Remember when we looked at the snapshot from her profile, she said her MCAT score was a little weak, but instead of spending a whole lot of time retaking the MCAT, she found a school that placed less emphasis on her standardized exam score and more emphasis on the other areas of her application. And then finally, Daryl said, develop good study skills. There's no perfect way to study, so experiment until you find one. And I would say if you could spend your time now while you're still in school before you apply to graduate schools and medical schools, is figure out what works for you as a learner. So that again is an element of capacity for improvement. So let's talk a little bit about what people's expectations are. And at first I thought about playing a little TikTok game here, but I figured I didn't want the technology to go awry. But have you seen those memes and those games on TikTok that says, show me or tell me you're an X without telling me you're an X? And I thought about tell me you're a pre-med student without telling me you're a pre-med student. Tell me you're interested in a career in medicine without telling me you're interested in a career in medicine. So if I asked you that question and we were on TikTok, what would you say? Tell me in the chat. How would I know that you're interested in being a doctor? Yeah, that's a good one. You're all part of HOSA. What else? What else would you tell me about yourself? Yes, Lydia, your passion for science and aiding others. Blood does not make you pass out. Oh, yeah. You would read Grey's Anatomy late at night. Okay. What else? What would tell me that you're interested in medicine? You want to develop treatment plans for patients that save lives. Yes. You got excited about learning about microbiomes in one of the workshops and your friends called you a nerd. You know what? I embrace my nerdness proudly. I'm happy about it. It's okay. Here's the thing that I want you to notice. Of all the things that came through in the chat, there were no two responses that were exactly alike. And there are no two applicants that are exactly alike. So when we talk about the expectations, people always think that the road to becoming a doctor and any other career realistically is a linear trajectory. People think you set these benchmarks, you have these timelines, and that's how you apply to medical school and become a physician. When in reality looks nothing like the expectations. People's journeys are different. Sometimes they take the MCAT and have to retake the MCAT. Sometimes their grades are not as strong when they finish their baccalaureate degrees and they have to take post-bac programs. Sometimes they have to work a couple of years to figure out how to pay for medical school or even how to pay for the application process. Sometimes they need a little bit more clinical experience or shadowing experience. Sometimes they need to interact with blood so they can figure out whether they're really afraid of it or not. Sometimes they need new mentors or new advisors to figure out how to articulate how their experiences map to a career in medicine. So if I could leave you with one thing here, it would be there is no right or single path to medical school. Again, everyone's trajectory is different and every experience has value. So I wanted to share what the general aspects of the timeline look like. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would take all of the dates out of the center. What's important is that you hit the various points. What's less important is when you hit those various points. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is what's valuable in your road to a career in medicine, regardless of when you do these things. And one of the things is getting experiences. So you all are getting invaluable experience through your participation with HOSA. And I mentioned HOSA. I mention HOSA everywhere I go, honestly, right? I'm like a HOSA cheerleader. And I mentioned HOSA, and it's frequent that I go into spaces where people have never heard of HOSA until I mention it. And when I do, you'd be surprised how many MDs and how many DOs and how many nurses start to chime in the chat. I did it on a conference session a couple of months ago, and I just mentioned HOSA, and all of a sudden people were chiming in the chat saying, I'm a HOSA alum, I'm a HOSA alum. HOSA alums are all over the healthcare industry. So the experiencing you're gaining in HOSA is important. But then we also at the AAMC have a summer experience called the Summer Health Professions Education Program. And it's not just for those who are interested in becoming medical doctors, it's also for those who are interested in dentistry. And this program is a summer program that you apply to following your freshman or sophomore year in college. And it gives you coursework, it gives you research experience and mentoring, and really prepares you for what a health career entails. Some other ways that and this program is free, and it usually comes with a stipend over the summer, and you can pick which track you want to pursue. Some other ways that you can gain experience besides the Summer Health Professions Education Program are volunteering in a hospice, becoming a CNA. I know some of you are on that track in the HOSA program. You can volunteer as an EMT, participate as a hospital scribe with Scribe America. You can even serve as a caretaker for a family or friend. All of those are valuable types of experiences. The next thing you'll want to think about is the overall application process. Once you've determined that you're ready to apply to medical school, these are the important things you'll want to think about. The medical school admissions requirements is a subscription service that the AAMC offers. And in this subscription service, all of the allopathic medical schools or MD granting medical schools in the United States and Canada have a profile in this resource. In this resource, they talk about what their requirements are for their medical school, what makes their school unique, what their missions are, what they're looking for in their candidates, what the average metrics are for those who apply to their programs and those who matriculate with their programs, and what their application timelines are. Now, here's the thing about the MSAR. Again, I said it's a subscription service, but if your resources are limited, and let's be realistic, we all don't always have finances to toss around. If your resources are limited, pre-health advisors get free, unrestricted access to the MSAR. So if you locate a pre-health advisor, or if you're in college already and there's an advisor on your campus, you can contact that advisor and access this resource through that advisor in order to explore what types of medical schools you might be interested in applying to. And we encourage people to begin exploring the MSAR as early as possible so that you have your mind made up about where you want to apply, and don't apply so broadly that it becomes cost prohibitive for you to really pursue your application. The next resource we wanted to share with you is the official guide to the MSAR. So this is a specific component to the MSAR subscription service that gives students tips. It includes national data about how admissions decisions are made, and it includes a suite of pre-med worksheets. In addition to the resources that we include on the MSAR, if you visit the AAMC website at www.aamc.org, there's a link for students and residents. You can go on that link and find all kinds of fact sheets, inspiring stories, and other resources about better understanding what it means to pursue a career in medicine. In addition to the MSAR and exploring what type of school you'd like to apply to, We also wanted to share that the medical school admission test is an important component of the application process. It's a standardized exam, and not everyone enjoys standardized exams, but if there are two things I could recommend to you about preparing for the MCAT, the first one would be build your reading comprehension skills. When people ask me how can they prepare for the MCAT or how can they improve their MCAT performance, I rarely ever say enroll in an MCAT prep course. Rarely ever. I usually say build your reading skills. So begin to read a book a week. And that book could be about driving race cars or basket weaving. But as long as you can build your reading speed and your reading comprehension, then you'll be able to interpret the questions that the exam asks and interpret those questions in a timely fashion so you have adequate time to cover all of the material on the exam. That's my tip number one. My tip number two is to begin to prepare for the information on the MCAT exam in medical school long before you're ready to apply. So most people in their trajectory start to prepare for the MCAT exam in their junior year of college and take the exam in the spring after their junior year. I never recommend that you wait that long to prepare for the exam. I think you should start to prepare for the MCAT as soon as you enter college. Why is that important? You'll be taking the core math and science courses who have material that are covered on the exam starting your freshman year. If you purchase an Mcat Prep book from your local bookstore or check one out of your local library, you can start to review the types of questions that will be asked on the exam that relate to the course you're currently enrolled in, and then utilize the professor's office hours to talk about any questions you may get incorrect in your preparation time. That way you're accessing a resource that you've already paid for and not paying for an additional class. You can also utilize your college's, once you get to college, you can also utilize your college's student affairs office to talk about your test taking strategies and maybe even be screened to determine if you have test taking anxieties that may need some behavioral or medical therapy to help you process. So the next thing about the MCAT exam is that it really covers 4 sections, and these sections are biological and biochemical foundations of living systems, chemical and physical foundations of biological systems, psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior, and critical analysis and reasoning skills. The other thing I want to tell you about the MCAT and preparing for it is that the Khan Academy has an entire suite of practice exams and resources that are free to you that prepare you for the MCAT exam. So again, if I would recommend any resource, it would be a free resource such as the suite of resources on the MCAT exam. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the centralized application service, which is the place where most medical schools, except for most MD granting medical schools, except for those in Texas, accept applicants to medical school. So the AMCAS application is a centralized application service, and it has a regular cadence where the cycle opens in May. You submit your applications beginning in June, and most schools have September to December deadlines. These are the basic components of the medical school application, and these are the places where you will articulate your competencies for medical school. So those 15 competencies we talked about in the workbook, that information will come out here in the application components. For instance, scientific reasoning is one of the core competencies that will probably come across in the coursework section of your application because you'll talk about the science courses you've already completed. Your letters of evaluation will likely talk about things like your capacity for improvement and your service orientation. So it's in these components of the application that those competencies and your readiness for medical school will start to emerge. The next thing I wanted to talk about briefly was the fee assistance program. This fee assistance program is the place where if you need additional financial support for applying to medical school, you can apply. And we increased the requirements during COVID so that anyone who's, I think we increased it to 300 to 400% over the poverty level can qualify for fee assistance. And it will give you support for taking the MCAT exam and submitting medical school applications, as well as subscription to the MSAR. I'm gonna go kind of quickly through the rest of these, and you can access them later on your own. So first is another resource we have for understanding the financial components of applying to medical school and securing financial resources for completing medical school, as well as information on loan repayment, public service loan forgiveness options, and other resources for calculating the cost of applying to and attending medical school. I'm going to run through these because I want to take our last few minutes for a couple of questions. The last thing I wanted to recommend to you before I take a couple of questions is subscribing to the AAMC's Pre-Med Navigator. So this is our newsletter for aspiring physicians. There are about 80,000 people subscribed to this newsletter. We share articles from admissions officers, tips from current and past medical students. We share resources, information on virtual fairs and summer experiences, and all kinds of tips and important resources for applying to medical school. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then I wanted to take a few questions from you. If you had a couple of questions or would want more information about any of the things that I discussed, feel free to unmute or post your questions in the chat. Feel free to ask me anything. Any questions, any thoughts? Well, I won't hold you hostage. Thanks everyone for participating in the workshop today. Feel free to keep going through the workbook and taking a look at resources on our website. I'm also going to tap, oh, can I explain more about MD PhD programs? Absolutely. So MD PhD programs are programs, of course, that you apply to where you'll complete a Doctor of Medicine and a PhD degree, usually in some scientific area. The way the application process works for most MD PhD programs is that you apply to the MD Office of Admissions, and there's usually a PhD science component of the admissions process where you submit one application and then perhaps an addendum that includes your research experience or your research interests. Usually your interview is a two-part interview, so you'll interview with the MD program and then have a separate interview with the PhD component. Most MD PhD programs have this overlap of the first couple of years. So the basic science years will count towards your PhD degree as well as your MD degree. And then you'll take a couple of years off for research and then return to your clinical years. The way most MD curricula are structured is that they separate your basic science coursework from your clinical years. And the clinical years are when you do your rotations through medical hospitals or teaching hospitals or clinical sites so that you can get more in-depth exposure on the different areas of medicine, be they anesthesiology, general medicine, pediatrics. Those are like basic clinical rotations. If you're doing an MD PhD program, those research years are usually separated from your time in your clinical years. So they'll either fall between the basic science years and the clinical years, or some schools will tack them on the end. So you do the basic science coursework first, then you do your clinical rotations through hospitals, and then you complete your research years at the end so that when you graduate with the MD PhD. Usually, like I said, those PhD areas are in the basic sciences or the biomedical sciences. There's several of the MD PhD programs that are cropping up, and in the application process, what you really want to do is demonstrate that you understand the value of research and the role research plays in healthcare overall. And then you need to be able to demonstrate that you have some awareness and experience with research. So some type of research in undergrad or summer research experiences you'll need to provide evidence of. It usually helps when you have a poster presentation or a publication. So as much as you can, try to get research opportunities while you're in undergrad so that you have that to submit with your application. I'll say that the requirements are a little bit more stringent on MD, PhD applications than they are on straight MD applications. So MD applications are looking for, you know, your holistic, everything you bring to the table, but the MD, PhD program is really looking to see your knowledge, your awareness, and your experience with research. The next question is, do certain medical schools prioritize clinical experience over research experience in medical school applicants or vice versa? Or do most schools look for a balance of both experiences in their applicants? So in general, most schools are looking for a balance of both. But then you also want to look at what the medical school's mission is. Go on their website, and under the About Us area, you should be able to learn a little bit about their mission. Or on their website, you should see something about their mission and the communities they serve. So hospitals that are, or medical schools that are situated in communities and have a focus on community health will look more for your clinical experience. Those that are associated with R1 or research universities will look more for your research experience. So it really depends on what type of school you're applying to, and that'll determine what they're looking for in their applications. That's why I suggested early on in the process, before you start to apply, explore schools to see what their mission foci are, and to see what kinds of students they produce. What kinds of doctors do they produce? What kinds of stories do they talk about on their news streams on their website? Follow their social media feed so you can see what they deem to be important, because that's the kind of stuff they'll promote. So yeah, it really just depends on what the school's mission is. That determines what kind of applicants they're looking for. It's 3:56, so I think I can take one last question. Sure, I was actually getting ready to type my email address in the chat, and then the questions came in. Yeah, so feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions, and make sure you subscribe to the Navigator newsletter. If you can't figure out how to access the link to subscribe, send me an email and I'll send you the registration link for the newsletter. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope this has been beneficial, that you learned something about the application process and learned something about yourself, and that you also learned from your colleagues as well and got some great ideas about how to ready yourself for a career in medicine. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for giving this information to the students.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Have a good rest of the conference.
Thanks, Machika.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.